In the 1630s, the streets of Constantinople hid a killer. At night, a tall man in plain civilian clothes would walk the alleys and the lowest taverns of the city, listening. He looked like nobody. He was, in fact, the most powerful man in the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan Murad IV, and he was carrying a 100-pound broadsword under that cloak, because if he caught you doing one specific thing, he would throw off the disguise and behead you on the spot. Not for treason, not for murder, for drinking coffee. If that sounds insane, understand this. Murad was not a lone madman. Across 3 continents and 400 years, kings, sultans, popes, and emperors declared war on a simple roasted bean. They banned it. They taxed it into the ground. They hired armies of spies to hunt it down. Some of them, like Murad, were willing to kill for it. So here is the question this video is going to answer. Why were the most powerful men on earth so terrified of a hot drink? The answer has almost nothing to do with the bean, and everything to do with what happened when people gathered around it. But to understand that, we have to go back more than 1,000 years, to a goat herder standing on a mountain in Ethiopia, watching his animals do something very, very strange. The story everyone tells starts in the highlands of Ethiopia with a goat herder named Qahveh. One afternoon, Qahveh noticed his goats eating the bright red berries off a particular shrub, and then refusing to sleep. They danced. They leapt around the hillside half the night with a manic energy he had never seen before. Now, is this story literally true? Probably not. It first appears in writings centuries later, but like most legends, it is wrapped around a real fact. Somewhere in Ethiopia, human beings first discovered that this plant did something to the body and the mind that nothing else could. At first, people did not drink coffee at all. East African tribes ground the berries, mixed them with animal fat, and rolled them into energy balls that warriors carried into battle. The world's first energy bar, roughly 1,000 years before the gym. The real breakthrough came across the Red Sea in Yemen. There, Sufi Muslim monks faced a holy problem. They needed to stay awake through long nights of prayer and chanting. Someone discovered that if you roasted these beans and brewed them in hot water, you got a dark, bitter drink that kept the mind sharp and the eyelids open for hours. They called it Qahveh. That word traveled. Qahveh became Qahveh in Turkish, then Café, then Cafe, then coffee. Every time you order one, you are speaking a word the monks of Yemen gave the world. And here is where the trouble begins. Because coffee did not stay in the monastery. By the early 1500s, the first true coffee houses opened in Mecca, Cairo, and across the Arab world. They called them Khaneh, and they were unlike anything that had existed before. People came not to worship, not to trade, but simply to sit, drink, talk, play chess, listen to music, and argue. About everything, including their rulers. And that is precisely what made coffee dangerous. The first crackdown came in 1511. The governor of Mecca, a man named Qahveh Beg, walked past a coffee house and saw a group of men drinking and, worse, laughing. He suspected they were mocking him. He looked closer and realized these places were full of people, awake, alert, and talking freely about politics. So he banned coffee outright. He had stockpiles burned in the street and declared the drink forbidden under Islamic law. It did not work. The ban was so unpopular that within months it was overturned by his own superiors, and Qahveh Beg himself was soon executed for unrelated corruption. This decision seemed small at the time. It was not. It was the first shot in a war between rulers and coffee that would last for centuries, and the rulers would keep losing it. Which brings us back to Sultan Murad IV. When he took the throne, his empire was riddled with plots, and he was convinced the coffee houses of Constantinople were where every conspiracy was born. So he didn't just close them. He made drinking coffee a capital crime and went hunting personally. And his successor? Arguably worse, just more creative. Under the next sultan, the punishment for a first offense was a beating. But if you were caught with coffee a second time, you were sewn alive into a leather sack and thrown into the waters of the Bosphorus. Think about that for a second. An empire that ruled from Hungary to Arabia decided that a cup of coffee was worth drowning a man over. They were not afraid of caffeine. They were afraid of what citizens did once they were caffeinated, gathered, and talking. Meanwhile, in Europe, coffee faced a different kind of trial. When it arrived in Italy around 1600, alarmed priests went to Pope Clement VIII and demanded he ban it. This was, they said, the drink of Muslims, Satan's drink, a threat to Christian souls. The Pope, reasonably, asked to try a cup before condemning it. He took a sip. Then, according to the story, he looked at his horrified advisors and said, "Why, this Satan's drink is so delicious that it would be a pity to let the infidels have exclusive use of it." And instead of banning coffee, the Pope of the Catholic Church reportedly blessed it. Coffee was now, officially, Christian approved. The bean had survived its first papal trial. But there was one problem holding coffee back. For a long time, the entire world's supply came through a single Yemeni port, Mocha. And the Arab traders guarded their monopoly ferociously. To stop anyone from growing their own, they would only export beans that had been boiled or roasted first. Dead seeds that could never sprout. Then, around 1670, a Sufi pilgrim named Baba Budan changed history by strapping 7 living coffee beans to his stomach and smuggling them out of Mocha. 7 beans. He carried them to the hills of southern India and planted them. Those hills still bear his name today, and coffee still grows there. The monopoly was broken by a man and the beans he hid against his belly. Once the plant escaped, coffee houses exploded across Europe, and nowhere did they matter more than in England. By the late 1600s, London had thousands of them, and they were so cheap and so full of conversation, debate, and news that people gave them a nickname: the penny universities. Because for the price of 1 cup, a single penny, you could sit all day and get an education just by listening to the smartest, loudest people in the city argue. And these were not just chat rooms, they became the engines of the modern economy. One coffee house, run by a man named Edward Lloyd, filled up with sailors, ship captains, and merchants who came to swap news about which vessels had sunk and which had made it home. They started insuring each other's ships right there at the tables. That coffee house grew into Lloyd's of London, one of the largest insurance markets on earth, still running today. Another London coffee house, called Jonathan's, is where traders bought and sold shares in companies, and it grew directly into the London Stock Exchange. Let that sink in. Modern insurance and the modern stock market were both born at coffee-stained tables by people too wired on caffeine to go home. Of course, the powerful noticed. In 1675, King Charles II of England tried exactly what Murad and Khair Beg had tried. He issued a proclamation titled, "For the Suppression of Coffee Houses," declaring them breeding grounds for sedition and idle gossip against the crown. The reaction was so furious, from merchants, from the public, from his own court, that the king was forced to back down and cancel the ban in just 11 days. 11 days. The most powerful monarch in England, defeated by a nation that refused to give up its morning cup. If you are finding this as wild as I did when I researched it, take 1 second and hit subscribe. We dig up the hidden histories behind the everyday things in your kitchen every week, and what is coming next will change how you look at your cup forever. Now, back to the bean that the kings could not kill. By the 1700s, Europe was addicted, and the race to grow coffee in the colonies turned into something out of an adventure novel. In 1723, a French naval officer named Gabriel de Clieu got hold of a single coffee seedling from the king's own greenhouse and boarded a ship to the Caribbean island of Martinique. The voyage was a disaster. A saboteur tried to rip the plant from his hands. The ship was attacked by pirates. And then the wind died, and the ship's fresh water ran out, and the crew was rationed to a few drops a day. De Clieu, dying of thirst himself, split his tiny ration of water and gave half of it to the plant. That one seedling survived, and from it grew, by some estimates, tens of millions of coffee trees across the Caribbean and Latin America. A huge share of the coffee in your life can be traced back to a man who chose to let a plant drink before he did. Brazil, today the largest coffee producer on the planet, got its first plants through an even stranger story. In 1727, a Portuguese officer named Francisco de Melo Paleta was sent to French Guiana to settle a border dispute. The French guarded their coffee seeds carefully and refused to share. But Paleta, according to the legend, charmed the French governor's wife, and when he left, she handed him a farewell bouquet of flowers, with live coffee seedlings hidden inside it. An entire national industry born from a flirtation and a bunch of flowers. But we cannot tell this part honestly without the darkness underneath it. That explosion of colonial coffee was built on slavery. On the French island of Saint-Domingue, today Haiti, enslaved Africans were worked to death, producing at its peak more than half of all the coffee in the world. The cheap, abundant cup that fueled Europe's cafes and revolutions was paid for in human lives on plantations across the Atlantic. The same drink that gave ordinary people a voice was, at the same time, silencing millions of others, and the rulers still would not stop fighting it. In Prussia, Frederick the Great hated how much money his people spent on imported coffee instead of good German beer. So in the 1780s, he created one of the strangest jobs in history. He hired a force of about 400 war veterans and sent them into the streets with one task: to walk around and sniff the air for the smell of roasting coffee. They were called the Kaffeeschnüffler, the coffee sniffers. If they smelled an illegal roast, they kicked down the door and seized it, and kept a cut of the fine as their reward. An entire secret police built around a smell. And now we arrive at the moment that proves the kings were right to be afraid all along. Paris, July 12, 1789. The cafes in the gardens of the Palais Royal were packed with angry, caffeinated dissidents. A young journalist named Camille Desmoulins climbed onto a table outside the Café de Foix. He was so nervous he stuttered. But not that day. He pulled out a pistol and he screamed at the crowd that the king's soldiers were coming to massacre them and that the time to fight was now. The crowd poured out of the coffee houses and into the streets. 2 days later, they stormed the Bastille, and the French Revolution had begun. The fortress of a 1,000-year monarchy cracked open, and it started with a speech on a table outside a cafe. Every sultan and king who had ever feared the coffee house had feared exactly this, not the drink, but the room full of awake, talking people that the drink created. Across the ocean, coffee picked a side too. After the Boston Tea Party, when American colonists dumped British tea into the harbor in protest, drinking tea became a mark of loyalty to the crown, and drinking coffee became patriotic. The United States quietly became a coffee nation, in part as an act of rebellion. It still is one today. And here we are. The drink that a sultan beheaded people over is now poured more than 2 billion times a day. Coffee is one of the most valuable traded commodities on the planet, grown across a band of more than 50 countries, and it props up entire national economies. The thing kings tried to outlaw is now so ordinary that we drink it half asleep, without a single thought about the blood, the smuggling, and the revolutions inside the cup. So think about the journey: a berry that made goats dance in Ethiopia, a drink that kept Yemeni monks awake in prayer, a bean smuggled across an ocean strapped to a pilgrim's stomach, saved on a dying ship by a man's last sip of water, and hidden inside a lover's bouquet, a drink that sultans drowned men for, that a pope blessed, that a king tried and failed to ban in 11 days, that grew the stock market and the insurance industry, and that, in the end, helped bring down a monarchy from the top of a cafe table. The powerful were never really afraid of coffee. They were afraid of what free people do when they are awake, together, and unafraid to talk. And that is a thing no ruler in history has ever managed to ban. Not bad for a bury a goat found first. If this surprised you, subscribe. We uncover the hidden history behind something in your kitchen every single week. And drop a comment telling me which part shocked you the most, the coffee sniffers, the leather sack, or the cafe that started a revolution. I read every one.